Hi guys, this is the fourth lecture for the cardiovascular system, and at this point you've learned about the major blood vessels, how they work, and how they deliver oxygenated blood to all the parts of your body and then back again to the heart. Today is about the special circulation, so we're learning about the organs, the blood delivery to the organs that are most essential to your survival, which means your brain, as well as the liver and the digestive organs. We'll also be talking about fetal circulation as well. So that's circulation through a growing fetus in a mother's womb when that fetus does not have functional lungs of its own to oxygenate its blood. Damage to these organs can result in severe bleeding that may cause permanent damage or death. That's especially relevant because a lot of the times if people have untreated cardiovascular disease, they can have complications from damage to these essential organs, like, for example, a stroke in the brain. The cerebral blood vessels, that's what we're starting with. These are the ones you need to know. And if you look at this image, the way to think about it is imagine that you have your sheep brain that you were dissecting, but now you flipped it over on your dissecting tray so that the top of the brain is now on the tray and the bottom of the brain is up and facing you. So this is what we call the ventral view. And here you can see that this is the pons. Here's the cerebellum. Here are the temporal lobes. Here is the inferior part of the frontal lobe, and then the parietal lobe is away from you, out of view. The easiest way to memorize the major blood vessels that service the brain is to watch this video. And I did also post it in Canvas separately, so I would recommend that you watch that so you can hear the narration that goes along with it. I'm also going to be narrating it here since I had to mute my mic in order to do this presentation. So you guys know that the heart pumps oxygenated blood through the aorta, which is right here. And then the aorta sends major blood vessels up your neck to your head. And this is the anterior view, by the way. So this person is staring straight at you. And the anterior blood vessels run up the sides of your neck. They're called the right and left carotid arteries. And then once they reach your brain, they branch off into what we call the anterior and middle cerebral arteries, while the back blood vessels run along the back of your neck, along the vertebrae. They're called the right and left vertebral arteries, and they fuse to form the basilar artery, which then splits into the posterior cerebral arteries. At this point, you've been looking at the anterior view, but now we're going to turn it sideways. And here you have the eyeballs, and here would be your nose, and we're going to start with this white blood vessel right here. So this is the carotid artery. Remember, you have one that goes up the right side and the left side of your neck. And then when it reaches the brain, it splits into the anterior cerebral artery that feeds the middle and front of your brain, as well as the middle cerebral artery that feeds the lateral parts of your brain. And then back here you had the vertebral arteries along the backside of your neck that fuse into the basilar artery, which then later becomes the posterior cerebral artery to feed the back of your head. Now, what you don't want is for there to be some sort of a blood clot that cuts off blood to a portion of your brain, and that could end up causing death. And so to prevent that from happening, we have this circle of Willis. Yeah, there we go. We have this circle of Willis right here. So it's this connecting artery right here that ensures that, let's say we have, I don't know, like a blood clot right here. That would suck because that would mean that you would have no blood going to the entire backside of your brain. Fortunately for you, this communicating artery right here ensures that if something were to go wrong, back here, let's say, that blood coming up this side of your brain, some of it could be shunted through here to then feed the parts of your brain that normally would have been cut off from their blood and would have had to die. And so this is kind of like a backup measure that your body has to ensure that its most essential organ, which is your brain, is able to function even when the blood vessels themselves may not be functioning. So going back to that ventral view that we had before, here are those major arteries again. We have, in the backside, we have the left and right vertebral arteries right here at the bottom, fusing into the basilar artery right here, which then branches off into the posterior cerebral artery this way, and then the posterior cerebral artery going that way. From the front, you've got these cut-off blood vessels, but just imagine that they're extended and running all the way down the front of your and the sides of your neck. So that would be the carotid arteries. You can see that word here, carotid artery, right? And then the carotid arteries branch off into the middle cerebral artery right here, as well as the anterior cerebral artery right there. And last of all, you have this communicating artery here and here. And because they're there, you have almost like a circular pattern right in the middle of your brain. And we call this the circle of Willis. And that's to ensure that blood can flow to the parts of the brain, even if you have a blockage of blood through one of the major blood vessels that would otherwise have to supply it. At this point, if you wanted to pause the narration so that you could just study this image some more, and you can follow along with where are the labels for each of these major arteries: the vertebral arteries, the basilar artery, the posterior cerebral arteries, the carotid arteries, the middle cerebral artery, the anterior cerebral artery, and the circle of Willis. And when you're ready, you can unpause the video and you can move on to the digestive system. Okay, next we're going to talk about the digestive blood vessels, and here are the blood vessels that you need to know. I'm going to point out the renal vein right now because it's not going to appear in our video or it doesn't even appear in this image. But the word renal means kidney, and the kidneys have not been pictured here just because they would clutter up the image and make it harder to read. But the renal vein, once again, brings blood from the kidneys back to the heart. Over here, another two that I want to point out to you right now is the hepatic portal veins, and the hepatic portal vein and the hepatic vein. Those two sound really similar, and it's easy to mix them up. So here's the way that I would talk about it. The word hepatic means liver. There's your liver right there. So if we were doing the rat dissection, what you would see as soon as you opened up the belly of the rat, the first thing that you would see is this gigantic liver. So hepatic means liver. You have the portal vein, which transports blood to the liver. There it is. And you have the hepatic vein, which transports blood from the liver back to the inferior vena cava. Okay, so here's a video that you can watch, and you can also pause the video whenever you need to read the text on the side. There's also a narrated version of this video in Canvas, but the narrated version is just a narrator reading the text off to the side. I'm going to provide my own narration, which is going to differ a little bit from what you see here. Okay, so let's start with, you know that anytime you have food or drink entering your body from your mouth, that's the main time that your blood can become contaminated with things that can pose a real threat to your health. And so there's the esophagus. It's just the tunnel from the mouth straight into the stomach. And then from there, all of that stuff will go into the small intestine here, and then into the large intestine. And all of these organs are surrounded by blood vessels because, first of all, they have to feed these organs with oxygen so that, they can stay alive. And then second of all, they have to receive nutrients from your food, which then go into the blood, which then can be delivered to all of the parts of the body. But you want to make sure that you're only delivering nutrients from your food, not toxins. Because what if you had bacteria in the food that you ate? Or what if you were drinking alcohol or something that could really be harmful to the health of your organs? That's the reason why you need the liver. So before the blood, the deoxygenated blood from all of these digestive organs gets returned to the heart, it must pass through the liver. The liver cleans the blood and then returns clean blood to the heart. And then the whole cycle repeats itself. So to give you some perspective, this is the stomach right here. Behind it is the spleen, but also the pancreas. So I think this is actually the outer part of the pancreas, and then it wraps around this way. Or it could be the spleen. Here you have the gallbladder. Then once again, here is the small intestine, and here is the large intestine. So right now what's happening is deoxygenated blood is draining from the stomach through what we call the gastric vein, because gastric means stomach, and it's draining from the pancreas and spleen through what we call the splenic vein. So here's the splenic vein. And then over here, blood is draining from the intestines through into this vein, which we call the mesenteric vein. And then the splenic vein and the mesenteric vein join together to form the hepatic portal vein, which takes the blood to the liver. So here we go again. You've got the gastric vein from your stomach and the splenic vein from your spleen. And then these two are going to feed blood into the splenic vein. Well, at the same time, blood from your intestines drains into the mesenteric vein here, the superior mesenteric vein. And then those veins, splenic and mesenteric, drain into the portal vein. This vein is also called the hepatic portal vein because remember the word hepatic means liver. So now you've got this potentially toxin-filled blood or potentially dirty blood based on whatever it is that you might have put into your body. That's now going to be delivered to the liver through the portal vein. Once it does, that blood is going to fill all of these capillaries that run throughout all the lobes of the liver. And the purpose of that is to provide lots of surface area so that toxins could be filtered out of the blood and that only good things can be left in the blood by the time they get here, the hepatic vein. So once again, this is the hepatic portal vein. It's delivering potentially dirty blood to the liver. And then here is the hepatic vein, and it's delivering clean blood into the inferior vena cava, right there. And the inferior vena cava will also receive deoxygenated blood that came from your lower body, so like your legs and stuff like that, which you'll see here. So all of this deoxygenated blood from your lower body and from your digestive organs is now drained into your inferior vena cava. And here you can see those again. This image is a little harder to interpret, but once again, this is your stomach here, right there. Behind it in those dotted lines is your pancreas. I know it's kind of hard to see. Here's your spleen. And so deoxygenated blood from your stomach, pancreas, and spleen are going to drain into the splenic vein here. While at the same time, blood from your intestines are going to drain into the mesenteric vein. And then those two veins join up behind all these organs into this vein right here. That's the hepatic portal vein. Remember, at this point, we should assume the blood is dirty because it might have been exposed to toxins or bacteria from your food or your drink. The liver will then clean that blood up and return that blood through these veins there, which fuse to form the hepatic vein, which then drain into the inferior vena cava. All right, last of all, we're going to talk about the fetus. So you have to remember the fetus is growing inside its mother's womb without any functioning lungs of its own. The first time that the fetus's lungs will actually take in and process oxygen will be when it's born and it takes its first breath. So it has to get oxygen from somewhere in order for its cells to grow, and that somewhere is the placenta. So here's the uterus, right there. There's the birth canal and the vagina. And then here's the mother's bladder, right here. Here's her pelvic bone, right there. Here's the colon and the anus. And then, of course, here's her spinal cord and her spine. And you'll notice that right there, in between the baby and the wall of the uterus, is the placenta. And the placenta is full of blood, lots and lots and lots of blood. And the blood is going to be delivered, that's the mother's blood, obviously. The blood is going to be delivered through the umbilical cord to feed the baby, and then the deoxygenated blood will be delivered or will drain from the fetus back through the umbilical cord and back into the placenta. So here you can see we've got both red and blue blood vessels that are going from the placenta to the fetus and back again. So once again, because the fetus does not have its own functioning lungs, it does rely on the placenta to bring nutrients and oxygen to its cells and to take waste from the fetus's cells and release them so that the fetus doesn't get poisoned by its own carbon dioxide. And because the lungs and the digestive system aren't functioning yet, the blood flow in the heart will have to bypass the lungs. Some of the blood may be delivered to the lungs and back again to the heart, but that's a completely non-functional thing. And then once the baby is born, the umbilical cord will be severed, so the connection to the placenta will be severed. And at that point, the baby's lungs must inflate and must start breathing for the baby. And so that's what it looks like. When you sever the umbilical cord after the baby is born, what you're doing is you're clamping it there to cut off the blood supply, which then causes the umbilical cord cells to die. And then they shrivel up into this little scab-looking thingy. It's pretty gross. After a few days, I think it's like 5 days or something, that stump of the umbilical cord then falls out, and what's left is a belly button. By the way, the umbilical cord is full of stem cells, and so some people will try to bank those stem cells, meaning that they'll try to have those stem cells harvested and stored in a special stem cell bank under special cryogenic conditions, so that if the baby ever needs a supply of stem cells that are compatible with its body, that they have it. It turns out that's a really, really expensive process to both harvest and then also store those stem cells for years and years and years. And it also turns out, even if you tried to donate those stem cells, it's really expensive to do, even as a donor, to donate those stem cells to other people or to their babies. You, as the donor, would have to pay hundreds or thousands of dollars in order to do it. And that's one of the sad things about our healthcare system is hospitals often are not set up to receive those kind of life-saving donations that could help other people. So this is not a functional video because it's not a YouTube video, and I'm only allowed to put YouTube videos in here. So clicking on here will actually take you to an external site. Let's do that. This is the St. Louis Children's Hospital, and they have a medical animation, which is pretty good. And I've also posted this link in Canvas. Okay, so here we've got the ovaries releasing an egg right there into the fallopian tubes, where they'll meet sperm, and then the fertilized egg then ends up in the uterus, where it implants and forms an embryo. The embryo then develops over the course of 9 months, but its main connector to its blood supply will be through the umbilical cord. Now here is the developing fetus's heart. And you'll notice that it looks really similar to an adult heart, except for a couple of things. So let's start with the similarities. We've got the right atrium, right ventricle. Between the right atrium and right ventricle is the right atrioventricular valve, shown here in blue. And then the right ventricle is going to take blood to the pulmonary trunk, right here, through the pulmonary semilunar valve, which is shown here in blue. You also have the left atrium and the left ventricle. The left atrium is connected to the left ventricle through the left atrioventricular valve, also known as the mitral valve. And the left ventricle then sends the blood out through the aorta, behind the pulmonary trunk right there. Here's the aorta. Through the aortic semilunar valve right there. So we still have 1, 2, 3, 4 chambers and 1, 2, 3, 4 valves. You also have the pulmonary veins right there. And then you know that there would be more pulmonary veins that would be going behind this heart to the right atrium from the other side of the body. I'm sorry, this is the left atrium. Here's the superior vena cava. Here's the inferior vena cava. Now let's talk about the differences. So there are two main differences between a fetal heart and an adult heart in terms of structure. The first is this hole right here. So your own atrium, since you are not a fetus, you should have holes that bring in blood from the vena cava here and here. You should also have just that valve connecting these two right there. You should not have this hole. So this is what we call the foramen ovale, and you should only see it in fetuses. And then one more right here. There is a, it's almost like a tunnel. It's tiny, tiny little, very short artery called the ductus arteriosus, and it directly connects the pulmonary trunk to the aorta. Okay, so let's watch this video. So we've got our 4 chambers. And then what you'll see is as blood comes in from the vena cava, I want you to notice that blood coming in from the inferior vena cava is red. So it's oxygenated blood coming in from the inferior vena cava, and we'll talk about why later. But as we keep going, blood coming from the superior vena cava is blue. So already in the right atrium, you have oxygenated and deoxygenated blood that are mixing. And then right there, it's a zoom in here, but right there you have the foramen ovale. And because the foramen ovale directly connects the right side of the heart with the left side of the heart, what it's doing is it's allowing blood to go directly to the left side of the heart through here, through the foramen ovale, without having to go to the lungs. So once again, oxygenated blood is coming from the inferior vena cava, mixing with deoxygenated blood from the superior vena cava, and then going through the foramen ovale directly into the left atrium. Okay, moving on. Blood is also going from the right atrium into the right ventricle and out through the pulmonary trunk. But once it does, notice that that blood is also going through this little tunnel here, the ductus arteriosus, this tiny little artery, directly into the aorta. At the same time, you do have blood in the left atrium that's going into the left ventricle, that's also going into the aorta. And so in none of these scenarios is blood going to the lungs. Now some blood can still go to the lungs because you are still going to have some blood going out through the pulmonary trunk to the lungs and then back again through the pulmonary veins. But you don't need that blood to actually make that trip because the lungs are not functional. So in order to have maximum efficiency of delivery of oxygenated blood, you're going to directly deliver blood through the foramen ovale and through the ductus arteriosus. And I do recommend that you click on this link outside of this presentation so that you can listen to the narration for this video yourself. But I'm going to trace it to you one more time. Oops. Okay, so one more time, here's how it goes. You can see it's written in words here. And if you'd like to read through the text before you move on, pause the video now. So what I'm going to do next is I've taken this image and we're going to just trace the pathway of blood through this image step by step. So let's start with, here's the blood coming from the placenta. It's oxygenated because it comes straight from the mother through the umbilical vein, through the liver where it can be detoxified and cleaned, although that already happens at the placenta as well, into the vena cava, the inferior vena cava, where it then mixes with deoxygenated blood from the upper body and head of the fetus. And so now you have partially oxygenated blood in the right atrium. Okay, so once again, starting with number 1, we had oxygenated blood from the placenta going through the umbilical vein and getting somewhat detoxified at number 2, the liver, even though it's already been detoxified at the placenta, and then mixing with deoxygenated blood from the superior vena cava at number 3, which is the right atrium. Okay, from there, we're now going to go in 2 different directions. The blood is going to go through the foramen ovale straight into the left atrium, and or it's going to go down through the right atrioventricular valve into the right ventricle, right here. So let's follow pathway 4 first. We have this blood here going through the foramen ovale, which is spelled for you here. There it is. Going straight into the left atrium, where it's going to be dumped into the left ventricle and then pumped out through the aortic semilunar valve into the aorta, which is number 6 here. At the same time, you also have this mixed blood in the right atrium, also going down into the right ventricle, which is 5A here, and then being pumped out through the pulmonary semilunar valve into the pulmonary trunk, where it can go to the lungs and then come back, or it can also bypass the lungs directly and go straight into the aorta through the ductus arteriosus, right there, 5B. It's spelled for you here. Okay, now you have all of this blood that is traveling through the aorta, going down the descending aorta, step 7, and then out to all of the parts of the body where it delivers the oxygen. And then as it's coming back, some of that, or not some, that blood is going to then return back to the placenta through the umbilical arteries. That got obscured because of the presentation controls. But deoxygenated blood goes through the umbilical arteries back to the placenta, which then reoxygenates the blood and fills it with nutrients, and then we go through that whole cycle once again. I included a link to a 11-minute video, which I think is really good. I would only recommend that you watch the first 7 minutes or so of it, and I also included it as a link in Canvas. But I do recommend that you watch it. It details what happens in fetal circulation probably better than I've done here. Okay, so here are your key takeaways. What do you need to know about special circulation? Well, there are 3 main bullets. You need to know that cerebral circulation supplies blood to the brain, that hepatic circulation detoxifies blood before it's returned to the heart, and that fetal circulation ensures that the baby gets nutrients and oxygen from the mother's placenta, even though its own lungs are not working. So when we talk about cerebral circulation, just remember that you have left and right carotid arteries that supply the front and middle parts of your brain with oxygenated blood. You also have the left and right vertebral arteries that fuse to form, the basilar and whatever. The point is that they supply oxygenated blood to the posterior part of your brain, and that the circle of Willis connects the 2 systems just as a protective measure. For hepatic circulation, remember that blood from all of your abdominal digestive organs are going to flow into the hepatic portal vein, which then takes that blood to the liver, where the liver will then detoxify the blood and then send it through the hepatic vein into the inferior vena cava. And for fetal circulation, remember that oxygen must come from the mother's placenta, not from the lungs. And so when we talk about placental oxygenated blood, you have the umbilical veins, which are red because they have oxygenated blood, sending that blood to the inferior vena cava, where it mixes with deoxygenated blood from the lower part of the fetus's body. Then it goes to the right side of the fetus's heart, where it further mixes with deoxygenated blood from the superior vena cava. And then that partially oxygenated blood can either go through the foramen ovale directly to the left side of the heart and then to the aorta, or it can go through the pulmonary trunk and then bypass the lungs by going through the ductus arteriosus and then directly to the aorta. And then last of all, the deoxygenated blood, after the aorta delivers the oxygen to the fetus's body, the deoxygenated blood then returns through the umbilical arteries back to the placenta. I do want you to notice for the adult body and even for most of the fetus's body, the veins are going to be blue or have bluish blood because they're bringing deoxygenated blood back to the heart, and the arteries are going to be red because they're bringing oxygenated blood away from the heart. But in the case of the umbilical arteries and veins, as well as the pulmonary arteries and veins, even in your own bodies, to the lungs, that coloring is switched. Because even though in this case the veins are bringing blood back to the heart, it's oxygenated blood this time. And then over here with the umbilical arteries, even though the umbilical arteries are bringing blood away from the heart, it's deoxygenated blood, and that's why they're blue. Okay, that's the end of this lecture.